Okay. Can you see the slides?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, we can see.
Okay. Where it is. Okay. So let's look at in terms of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. How many of us are aware of how many articles are there in Universal Declaration of Human Rights? Can someone guess?
If I'm not wrong, there are 30 articles.
Okay, good. Very good. Thank you. Yeah, it's the first after the World War, the countries have met together and they have made this resolution deciding in terms of all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights without any distinction. I think that this is where we need to look at in terms of that wherever you are born, whichever sex you belong to or you identify yourself, you are entitled to equal rights. So those 30 rights which are enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Rights is applicable to all human beings on the earth. So this also becomes a common standard. So if one need to assess whether the people are enjoying, can you please mute?
Somebody needs to be muted.
Okay. So this becomes the standard for assessing whether the people are enjoying the rights or not. So there are 5 principles which govern the Universal Declaration of Rights, where we are talking about all human beings have got the rights. So these rights, human rights, there is respect for each other, there is autonomy, there is equality, dignity, and fairness. So each of the 30 articles of the Universal Declaration of Rights is governed by these 5 principles, where everyone is seen equal with dignity, autonomy, respect, and treated with fairness. So there are some concepts within this, some fundamental concept that we need to see in terms of how we look at the human rights. There are, let's say, look at how many people are aware of these terms. When we say universal, can someone say? Cynthia? Cynthia, can you?
Well,
Yeah.
good afternoon,
Yeah.
everybody. I'm glad to be here today.
Yeah.
When you talk about universal, you're talking about the world, that it is something that belongs to everybody who inhabits at least our earth
Yeah.
and is a human person. universal. That's what I understand by that term.
So it's applicable to everyone and everywhere, wherever you are born. It is not limited by any geography. All these 30 human rights that are enshrined is applicable whether you are in one geographical location or other geographical location, and to everyone, whether you are man, woman, or other gender, everyone this is applicable. So inalienable, can someone say what is inalienable? Yeah.
Hello.
Yes.
Inalienable simply means that they are not separated. They should be enjoyed with all other human rights together,
Yeah.
and you cannot separate them from the human beings.
Is that a Doreen?
Yes.
Can the other person, can you please identify yourself?
Francis Mugwa.
Francis. Okay, Francis. Yes, Doreen.
Yes, inalienable is a human right that you cannot share with someone. So you cannot take us. No one can take it away from you.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. Yeah, I think that is what we need to look at. It is in terms of when we say inalienable, Doreen is what Francis has comes to the later part, but Doreen, what is she saying is in terms of you cannot take it away from anyone by any institution. That's why there is a lot of debate on the life sentence that the governing institutions play, because right to life is a human right, so that you cannot take away by any means, by any reason. So inalienable is you cannot take away these human rights. Any person or any institutions, any procedure cannot take away these human rights. Indivisible. Thanks to Doreen for that. Can someone say what is indivisible?
Hello.
Yeah.
I would like to answer.
Yeah.
In my opinion, I feel indivisible are rights that cannot be fully enjoyed without the other. So you cannot enjoy one right and compromise on the other. For example, if we are making progress in the political and civil rights framework,
Yeah.
it automatically makes it easier for us to exercise control over some economic, social, and cultural rights
Yeah.
that we as citizens are promised.
Yeah. Thank you, Aiswin. I think that's one part of it, one aspect where you cannot compromise one right over another. So all rights are important. No one right is superior. So therefore, I think there are two things that we need to look at. What Aiswini is saying is we need to expand that. You can't compromise one over the other because they are all important and there is no hierarchy. These 30 human rights that are enshrined, it is not that one is superior to another. Every human right is important or equally significant. So indivisible is, there are three characters which we need to keep in mind. Apart from you cannot compromise one right over the other, the second one is that all are important, and then there is no hierarchy. There is no superior and inferior human rights. Yes, Cynthia and then Doreen.
If you also want to put it for the human person, thinking about indivisible,
Yeah.
I think it's also the, will I call it the concept or this thing of this term of common good,
Okay.
meaning everything about the human person.
Yeah.
Then when you multiply it, human beings as a whole.
Yeah.
Good. So you can't divide. You shouldn't be divided. If the rights of a person, no hierarchy, life, whatever
Yeah.
it is. So the people as a group have that same thing. It cannot be divided. So in practice, we don't know. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia, for that. Doreen?
Okay, let me try.
Yeah.
For me, I think all human rights is important and it comes with responsibility.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Very, very good. That I think that you touched on the other fundamental things. This is when we talked about the human rights, where we are talking about dignity and no discrimination. So both we are talking about not only rights, but there are also obligations that you need to fulfill. So they talk about freedoms, but they also talk about what obligations you have while you enjoy these rights. So the other one is interdependent. It goes with the indivisibility. So like when we said that you cannot compromise one over the other is in terms of that all are interrelated. So the life is interrelated to livelihood is related to education. So they are not mutually exclusive. They reinforce each other. So therefore, these are the four fundamental concepts that we need to keep in mind while we are talking about human rights, that the human rights are universal, that are applicable to everywhere, to everyone, inalienable. You cannot take it away by any institution, by individual. They are indivisible. You cannot compromise one over the other. There are no hierarchy. All are important, and they are interdependent. These are four fundamental characteristics of human rights that we need to keep in mind. These are determined by these two principles where we are talking about equality and no discrimination. And as just now the Doreen was talking about, that as much as rights are important, the obligations are also equally important. Let's move forward. Having said that, since we are now talking about women's human rights, so therefore when the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was made in 1948, where it says that everyone without distinction of sex, race, geography enjoy these rights, it includes everyone means woman, but in practice this has not been the case. Therefore, there was a lot of effort, lot of movements, lot of efforts where people started claiming that there is need to recognize women's rights as human rights. So it was, though it was 1948, so almost 50 years after that, in 1993, it was reaffirmed that women's rights are human rights. And neglect of human rights is a rights violation. It's a violation of human rights. And if you look at in terms of the definition of women's rights, very, very comprehensive, and it leaves no stone defined. So you look at in terms of women's human rights include the rights to equality, dignity, autonomy, information and bodily integrity, and respect for private life, and the highest attainable standards of health, including sexual and reproductive health, without discrimination, as well as right to freedom from violence, any part of violence or ill treatment. So it's a very comprehensive one. It's the first step, although it is part of the human rights, but in practice, this has not been given equal emphasis, equal focus, equal value. So therefore, a very elaborate, comprehensive definition is made so that it directs women's rights as human rights. Doreen, you have anything to share? Your hand is
No,
up? No? Okay.
no.
So therefore, moving from the Universal Declaration of Rights and then understanding the fundamentals, we are now looking in terms of how is the women's human rights are defined within the UN Declaration. So there are instruments, international instruments that closely monitor, promote and monitor women's human rights for gender equality. So there are, at international level, there are 3 institutions. One, we are very familiar about CEDAW. Shortly, we know about CEDAW. It's a convention on the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. So this is an international bill of rights. The second one, which is equally important in terms of for advancement of women's rights and gender equality, is the Beijing Declaration on Platform for Action, which is blueprint for advancement of women's rights. This was in 1995. And there is a UN Commission on the Status of Women, which is exclusively responsible to monitor and then foster status of women. And in Africa, there is a particularly where which we need to be very proud and then would harness is the African Charter on Human Rights, and with Maputo Protocol in 2005, which talks about rights of women in Africa. These are the 4 instruments that are available for us to look at. One, gender equality, and the second one is in terms of advancement of human rights. So far, any questions? Anyone has questions so far? Yes, Doreen and Tawanga. Doreen?
No, I mistakenly put my hands up.
Okay.
No.
Okay, Tawanga? Doreen, can you?
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to add that I just wanted to add one key instrument for the 1993 conference. I think that should have been the Vienna conference.
Okay.
I just thought maybe you needed to add that as well.
Okay. Thank you, Tawanga, for adding that. Tawanga, where are you from?
I am from Malawi.
Okay. You are from Malawi. Yes, Martha? Martha, you raised your hand?
Yes, Prof, I did.
Yeah, please.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I just wanted to find out when we write things, we write like the country has ratified, has signed, has done that. Maybe just for Prof to explain what is the difference between ratification and signing, which one oblige the country to abide or to what is the word?
Yeah.
To
oblige to ensure, yeah. So signed is not legal. Ratified is a legal one, because if you means you have ratified that you would take responsibility for all the obligations that are set there. There are 3 things that we need to keep in mind as we go along. Probably we can look at, I think Thanks, Martha, for raising that. One is signed, ratified. The third one is the optional protocol. Signed is that you have signed it, but you have no legal obligation to practice it, to put that on ground. But if you have ratified it, you are obliged to ensure that those provisions are implemented in your state. The optional protocol, which we will hear later, but I would say optional protocol, if you need, although you may have ratified, if you don't sign the optional protocol, then you have, because optional protocol is that anyone can complain to the UN on non-implementation of provisions. So the state is subjected to that. So if you have signed the optional protocol, that any civil society member, any institution can do it. But if the country has not signed the optional protocol, you don't have that provision. Martha, is that clear now?
Thank you, Prof. You also make me clear on the optional protocol. Thank you. I have been wondering what is this optional.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Jaharal, and then Cynthia and Mary.
Hello.
Yes, Jaharal.
Good morning, good evening, everyone. This topic is very interesting, but my opinion, just the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action Beijing, this is considered a blueprint for the advancement of human rights in 1995. But my question is, it has comprehensive committees under 20 critical areas of concern. But my question is, what is the main challenge or barrier to implement this issue? Please share me. Thank you.
Okay, but I will keep that to the end, Jaharal. I will respond to that. Then Cynthia and Mary, can you release your, yes, Jaharal and Doreen, can you take away your hand, please? Because it keeps popping up. Yeah, yes, Cynthia.
Okay, is this optional protocol? I understand the signing, no legal obligation. When you ratify, you are obliged to implement. Then the optional protocol is used. If a country signs the optional protocol, it means they are exempt from any legal action if they don't do it, or is it the opposite? Let me get it clearly.
Yeah. See, the optional protocol is in terms of, see, the moment when you are ratified it, you are obliged to do it. But the fundamental principle of UN is the believing the sovereignty of the state. So you have signed, you have ratified it, but you are sovereign to implement because the way that you would like to implement it. So the optional protocol is a check and balance, is an accountability measure, because people can hold you accountable because you have ratified it. What did you do with that? So that is an opportunity that is given to any member to raise, and at different levels they can certainly raise within their countries. But if the countries do not respond, they can send it. They can present to, because there are UN rapporteurs who are there for specific to each of the rights, and through them you can reach out to the UN Assembly, presenting what are the disparities that exist in your country on the human rights.
Hello.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. I think you have somehow touched the area.
Yeah.
Because you use a particular word.
Yeah.
Disparity from what is supposed to be and what is.
Yeah.
And a lot of states and governments use this sovereign. Yeah. Let me use the word loophole, because I work with irregular migrants.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
a document says A,
Yeah.
protocol says this, and let me use myself. I'm a
Yeah.
country now.
Yeah.
I have signed, I have ratified,
Yeah.
but yet I look for loopholes in certain sections of a constitution not to implement. So my second question, I don't know whether you can answer it or something that we'll keep on advocating, is when a country falls short of these things it has signed, ratified, and done, are there any implications internationally based human rights protocol?
Yeah. There are certainly, I think, can we come back to that later, because we would look at in terms of accountability measures.
No problem.
We will come to that in terms of, but there are in terms of, I think, see, there are three principles, Cynthia, that we need to keep in mind, because when the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was made, and more than even before the UN Assembly was made, it was very conscious that this global institution will not take away the sovereign responsibility of the state. It will not in any way undermine the sovereignty of each state. So it only is only a diplomatic instrument. But however, if you have ratified and the international instruments, you are obliged to do it. And there are even if you have not opted for the optional protocol, by ratifying it, you are allowing UN rapporteurs to monitor to your obligation to the international instruments. So therefore, what is called is naming and shaming. So in the assembly, in the UN Assembly, so wherever there is violations, wherever there are disparities, that will be raised for response by the state. So therefore, it becomes more in terms of raising an issue at the global level when all the states are there. So each state would feel not good to be in that position. That's the maximum that they can do. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is Mary.
Yes, Mary.
Yes, I'm from Kenya.
Okay.
And I have participated in an optional protocol.
Okay.
With the UN rapporteurs. And
Okay.
I think this will make it clear to most of us.
Okay.
Kenya had a very bad post-election violence.
Yeah.
That was in 2007 after the elections. You remember, like, we had very bad violence.
Yeah.
And so many women were raped. Yeah. So many women have conceived. I've met some of them. Their babies are now going to be 15 years. Yeah. But it was never brought up. They were never compensated. Like, the country was in denial. Yeah. About this. Yeah. And also, so many girls from Kenya are dying in Saudi Arabia. And like, the country is doing very little to prevent girls from either going to Saudi Arabia or to ensure, because like Saudi Arabia does not have labor laws. Yeah. But Kenyan women have kept on going there. So 2 years, I think it was 2 years ago, I was in Switzerland and I met the UN rapporteurs and I raised this. Yeah. And the government has been questioned. Yeah. But I'm not working with the government. I'm just an individual. We came together with a few other groups. Okay. And I presented, yes.
Thank you, Martha, Mary, for sharing this. That's where I think there are opportunities. One need to harness those opportunities. Let's move forward.
Hello.
Yes, Doreen.
I just want to go back to the slide of the 4 international instruments.
Yeah.
I just want to ask a question. how often do the country or the state should report to the UN Assembly?
Okay. Let's let's keep that question. I think we are coming back to that later, Doreen.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, let's move in terms of, as we said, the two important instruments that are key references for gender equality and advancement of human rights are CEDAW and Beijing Platform for Action. So both these documents are built on certain fundamental principles. The first one is in terms of the faith in dignity and equal rights of women and men and other gender, commitment to the principles of equality and discrimination. There are other two things is very clear is in terms of what is discrimination against women is very well defined by the UN, the CEDAW. CEDAW has very well defined both in terms of what is a discrimination, what is violence. So discrimination is any distinction, any exclusion, or any restriction made on the ground of sex or gender that impairs the equality, them to enjoy the equality of rights. So it leaves no stone turned. So everything is clear. Also in terms of violence, define any act of violence, whether it is physical, sexual, or psychological, whether it is occurring in public or private life. So one of the major things that comes in terms of violence is in terms of it is more personal, but personal is also political. So therefore, as long as it becomes an issue, so therefore violence is seen, any form of violence, but wherever it is occurring. So these are the principle that there are. One is in terms of it targets the cultural practices which restrict enjoyment of equal rights. And lastly, we have been talking about it very much in the last few minutes, is in terms of obligation of the state. So the moment when you have ratified it, you are obliged to review the existing policies and then make revisions, or if they are not satisfied enough, make new things, as well as introduce positive actions. And most important is that any of those policies or provisions, while you are making, you refrain from violating the women's human rights. So these are 5 fundamental elements in both CEDAW and Beijing Platform for Action. The first one is it is best built on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the principles of dignity, equality, non-discrimination. They all also is inbuilt into the provisions of CEDAW and Beijing Platform for Action. The second one is in terms of clear definition of discrimination and clear definition of violence. And then it targets the cultural practices. And then the last one is the obligation of the state to ensure the provisions are made for which necessary policy instruments must be in place. Now let's move to when we say these are 2 references. So both talk about similar things. Let's look at in terms of how many articles are there in CEDAW and how many in Beijing Platform for Action. Can someone guess? Hello?
Hello.
Yes, Etelvina? Etelvina? Tilvina, can you please? Martha?
I want to guess on CEDAW.
Okay. Yeah.
It's less than 100.
No, it's a very wild guess. Yeah. No, SIDA has got 16 articles, whereas Beijing Platform for Action has 12 critical areas. So Universal Declaration of Human Rights has got 30 articles, and SIDA has got 16 articles. 14 are more related to rights, whereas others are more related to instruments or protocols that are required for ensuring it. So there are, since both refer to the gender equality and women's rights, I try to do in terms of what are the common factors that exist in both SIDA and Beijing Platform for Action. So there are 7 provisions or 7 articles in SIDA and the 7 critical areas which are aligned to each other. The first one is in terms of the employment. So elimination of all forms of discrimination against women and other gender in employment, addressing the structural causes, reducing gender inequality, equal rights to work, right to ownership and inheritance, and restructuring of policies and elimination of discrimination and violence at workplace. It's all around work and employment. So both in terms of Article 11 and 16 of SIDA and critical areas 1 and 6 of Beijing Platform for Action focus on the employment. And it looks in terms of addressing, challenging the form discriminations and violence that exists in employment against women and other gender. The second one is in terms of the education. So Article 10 of SIDA and critical area 2 of Beijing Platform Action talks of elimination of all forms of discrimination against women and other gender, removing all barriers that impede schooling, tackling gender-based violence in school, diversifying vocational courses. This is where a lot of things come in terms of stereotype. Just now what was raised in terms of the way you think in terms of what type of courses women and girls can have. So therefore there is a stereotypical approach to them. So therefore you find STEM in terms of science, technology and mathematics subjects are largely dominated by men and boys. So therefore diversifying vocational education, creating gender sensitive curricula and enhancing public allocations. The third one is in terms of health, particularly in terms of the health, these sexual and reproductive health, and reducing the gender gaps in morbidity and mortality. But that's where you look in terms of the maternal mortality rates, a high maternal mortality rates in most of the countries. So therefore, apart from the employment, livelihood, education, the third one is the health. And the fourth one, as I said, in terms of both the Beijing Platform for Action and SIDA, looks in terms of elimination of cultural practices. They target the cultural practices in terms of female genital mutilation, early marriages, or female feticide. So the Article 5 and critical area 3 looks in terms of the harmful practices and particularly emphasize the shared responsibility in sexual and reproductive behavior as well as household work. Then this one is very significant in terms of both Article 14 and critical area 6 has very specific focus on the discrimination against women and other gender in rural and remote areas. This is where most of us who are working with rural communities need to make use of it. The other one is in terms of right to political participation, not only in terms of exercising your franchise, but also standing up for public positions. And the last one is in terms of elimination of violence. There is a declaration, a clear declaration in SIDA, and then the critical area 4, elimination of the prejudices and customary practices that condone violence against women. Reviewing legislations and the violence both in terms of private and private. So these are 7 provisions which are common in both SIDA and Beijing Platform. One is the work, employment and livelihood, education, health, violence, cultural practices, then in terms of the specific focus on the rural and remote areas, the political participation and the elimination of violence. When we come to the SIDA, apart from these 7, the SIDA has got additional provisions in the form of Article 9, which grants women's equal in terms of nationality, because this is what we have seen. Even now, there are 7 countries which still look at in terms of that the woman's nationality is determined by her spouse. So therefore, the SIDA says that the women have a choice to make. They can acquire, they can change, or they can retain the nationality, not only for themselves, also for their children. And the other one, which is very significant, is in terms of all forms of discrimination against women in matters relating to marriage, in terms of freedom of choice, whom to marry, when to marry, how many children. And so therefore, all related to marriage in terms of choice, in terms of spacing, and in terms of minimum age, and all in terms of stipulated in the elimination of. So therefore, apart from the 7, the SIDA talks about 2 other significant ones, which is related to nationality and marriage. On the other hand, the additional provisions in the Beijing Platform for Action, apart from the one is in terms of the refugees, where it talks about a specific right to protection in terms of their self-determination after they have returned as a result of refugees, as a result of the conflicts, either armed or other conflicts. The others are related to in terms of the participation. One is in terms of instruments, that it talks about that every state which has ratified the Beijing Platform for Action must have their own national machinery for advancement. So that it can be a ministry, it could be a department, some national machinery at the state level to promote, foster, and monitor that. There is the other one is in terms of media, where the stereotypical images are promoted. So that it talks about in terms of encouraging or holding them the media accountable if they are projecting the stereotypical inferior images of women. Then in terms of participation in environment, and the last one is the very specific focus on girl child. So it gives a specific focus. So therefore, these are additional provisions in Beijing Platform for Action. So if you look at in terms of, there are some common provisions which are targeted both by SIDA and Beijing Platform for Action, while SIDA and Beijing Platform also have additional provisions. So put them together, these 16 articles and 12 critical areas give you a wide, comprehensive approach to gender equality and advancing women's human rights. So what are the concerns that we have? Because although it was, if you look at in terms of CEDAW was made in 1979 and Beijing Platform for Action is in 1995. We are finishing almost 50 years in terms of 45 years to be precise in terms of CEDAW, and more than 25 years in terms of Beijing Platform Action. There is progress. We need to acknowledge there is a progress, but the progress is very slow and uneven. So it's docile women, particularly from marginal, although there is a provision in terms of targeting rural and remote areas, but the attention still from marginalized communities is docile, and the conservative narrative still prevail over. The policies are fragmented because although it is said that the policies need to be reviewed and then revised, but the emerging policies are also fragmented. And the influence of culture and religion is both playing in some places positive, but in other places negative. So having done in terms of, although there are these provisions are there, and then there are these concerns that we have. Now let's come back to in terms of what we have been talking about, the accountability to provisions. So although there are 193 countries which have membership in the UN, 189 countries have ratified the CEDAW, which means they are legally bound to fulfill the provisions of the convention. The only 4 countries which are not which are not signed is in terms of the US, which is said to be a bigger one, the Iran, Somaliland, and then there is one more. All others, the countries at least which are present here have ratified it. But if you look at in terms of which are the things that have ratified it, as I said, all the countries that we are participating now have ratified. But in terms of optional protocol, I think Mata should, Mary should tell me what is the latest position. As I know, in terms of India, ratified it in 1993, but they have not signed the optional protocol. Kenya has ratified in 1984, but they have not signed the optional protocol. Mozambique, they have signed the optional protocol. Namibia, they have signed the optional protocol in 2000. And Malawi also signed in 2000. Pakistan, they have not signed the optional protocol. Botswana have ratified in 1996, and then optional protocol signed in 2007. Eswatini ratified it in 2004, but no optional protocol. Uganda ratified it in 1985, but no optional protocol. So within the group that we have, there are at least the India, Kenya, Pakistan, Uganda, and Eswatini. They have not signed the optional protocol. Let's look at in terms of the grounding the provision. Is this sovereign? I have been saying it because you can only name and shame, but the ultimate responsibility is left to each state, though they have ratified it. The national reporting, just now what our Doreen was raising it, because every country is
Yeah,
every country need to, after they have ratified it, 4 years they need to send the reporting, the status report to SIDA committee. There is a committee that UN has set up to monitor the implementation of provisions of SIDA. So therefore, each country is expected to provide to the UN the progress that they have made once in 4 years. The optional protocol accept complaints from individuals, as Mary was saying, because any individuals can do it on violation of rights. And this is only if the parties have ratified the optional protocol. However, there is a special rapporteur. Even if you have not signed the Francisca, can you please mute your Francisca, can you please mute? There are special rapporteurs who would examine the progress and then represent to UN and make government's action public. And there is a shadow report by civil society. You can do it and you can also present it. So these are the accountability provisions that you have. One is in terms of there is a regular reporting that is expected from the state to the UN. There is an optional protocol which any individual civil society can make use of. Special rapporteurs, which are by ratifying it, you are allowing UN to send the rapporteurs to your country. So therefore, that provision is there in terms of special rapporteurs who can come to your state, visit, find if there are any disparities, any violations, and then they can represent to UN, and then they will ask for government action, and that will be made public in terms of what if they have found that there are violations, like what Kenya Mary was talking about, the violations in Kenya. So the rapporteurs can seek government's response to that, and they can also present to the UN. So the other provision is in terms of shadow report, because civil society can take initiative and which can make a shadow report, because while the government sends its report, the shadow report can be done by the civil society, which can to see how realistic and reliable is the report that the state has made. So in terms of Beijing Platform for Action, again, the 4 countries abstain from ratifying it, but there are major countries, all the countries which have ratified it. It's expect that a national plan is there, which is gender sensitive talking about. So that becomes the reference for people to see whether there is a progress or not progress. It is expected to establish a national mechanism. If it exists, it can either assign to a ministry, or it can set up a department, but there must be a national mechanism to look at this. And then consultation invites the consultation of civil society and involving women in implementing policies. So these are the accountability provisions that you have both for SIDA and the Beijing Platform for Action. So there are, which are the countries if you look at in terms of the women's human rights, there you have a UN General Assembly is the principal policy making. And so therefore they also look at in terms of what is the follow-up or progress in terms of SIDA and Beijing Platform for Action. There is an UN special rapporteur on violence against women. There is a UN committee on SIDA. There is a UN working group on discrimination against women and girls. And there are a group of efforts and experts on violence against women. There is an African Summit. So each of these institutions, so by ratifying it, you are allowing these institutions to make visit, observe, and then seek feedback. So these are available, which can be used to raise the issues of violence. So what could be done? Despite this, each of us can make the commitment to check one's own biases and challenge prejudices, use and expand our own sphere of influence. So we know that these are provisions are there, these are accountability measures. So each one of us can make our own intervention, stand up against gender justice. So therefore, as we saw last time, the change must start from us. So therefore, if we want to assert women's rights as human rights, then we need to look at both men and women. What are our own biases? How do we challenge our own prejudices, which we have learned from our socialization or our cultural upbringing? How do we expand and influence our own sphere? Because maybe within the household, within the neighborhood, within our friendship, and wherever we find that injustice, gender disparity, how do we stand up? Engage with civil society. We need to look at, that's where we need to look at, there are campaigns, public campaigns sponsored by the civil societies. So, and then in terms of where are there are opportunities, well, let's look at in terms of as the sustainable development goals we clearly have in terms of on gender equality, specifically goal 5, while other goals also reflect the gender equality. So these are the approaches that one can make. So I would keep this, I will now stop the share, and then look at in terms of how do we, what questions we have. Can I stop the screen? Okay. So now let's look at what questions we have. As a fans, Martha?
Thank you, Prof, for that.
Yeah.
A good presentation.
Yeah.
I was always wondering why can the civil society not share the shadow report while our country report gets shared with them? Because if it could be shared before the committee meeting, it will give the country an opportunity also to defend itself.
Yeah.
Now you go there, you are put on the spot just there, and you have to respond there. It's a bit unfair to the member states.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think this is where, in terms of I don't know, Martha, about the Namibian thing. How does the state respond to shadow report by the civil society? Because there are some countries you have freedom of expression, and then the state can only take or either take or ignore it, but they may not reprimand the civil society. But in some cases, they may reprimand so that may be one insecurity that civil society. Therefore, how what is the right word in terms, how powerful is the civil society feel in terms of, ideally, yes, what you said, Martha, is in terms of they need to present to the nation, to their own country, to show where there are differences, where there are gaps before going international. I think I need to look at in terms, are there encouraging environment mechanisms within the country is something that probably one need to check. But I would certainly agree in terms of my approach would be in terms of whatever may be the situation. I think my first port of call should be my own state before I go international. I need to present my own report, because those reports need to be, when you are presenting, it need to be substantiated with enough data. If you can provide enough data, I think most governments may respond to them. Yes, Mary?
I think you have said it right,
Yeah.
that in most cases, civil societies will try to engage with the government.
Yeah.
But like most African governments, they prefer saying, oh, we have put up this policy, our constitution says this, we have this act, we have, but implementation is the problem.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, like when they say at the UN level, like their constitution or they have a policy,
Yeah.
the special rapporteurs take it like what is in the constitution is being implemented.
Yeah.
While in most cases, our policies are kept on the shelves.
Right.
And in most cases, when the civil society comes up and says some things that happen,
Yeah.
I want to tell you there is a lot of victimization,
Yeah.
security issues.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let me say something that happened at one time.
Yeah.
We had where I live in Busia, a 16-year-old girl was gang raped by 8 boys. And when everybody was being asked about it, it was like, it's not true. This girl was not gang raped.
Yeah.
And because it was in my area,
Yeah.
I stood up and said, this girl has been gang raped.
Yeah.
Because I took her to hospital. She had developed fistula.
Yeah.
And at that time, you even get the Inspector General of the police calling you like, are you aware you are spoiling the name of this country? Are you
Yeah.
aware you are ruining the country?
Yeah.
Because the whole thing, it was called Justice for Liz.
Yeah.
And the media really helped.
Yeah.
And we had 1 million signatures globally
Oh.
demanding for justice.
Oh.
And the police were saying, all these boys have been arrested. And I was saying, none has been arrested.
Oh.
So you get such a thing puts you
Yeah.
at risk.
Yeah.
Such a thing puts you at risk. Yeah, you get
Yeah.
targeted. You get, yeah. So you don't just go sharing your shadow report. You know, it might result to something else.
Yeah.
And sometimes even you want to share it anonymously, especially if it is touching on very sensitive things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Just like what
Yeah,
I was saying.
Yeah.
Our government was in denial that women were not raped.
Yeah.
But these women were raped. The children are there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's thanks, Mary, for sharing that. See, this is a usual one in terms of denial of facts, because the government would like to project themselves outside that they are doing all that what they have agreed to do it. Although in reality, it may not be the case. So therefore, both in terms of people who are in the government would use sensitivity to victimize the civil society. Therefore, I was struggling to get the word in terms how vibrant is the civil society. Yeah, but that vibrancy will be determined by the response of the state. But most states invariably, this is where we come to more details in our next class in terms on the power. So the institutions which are holding power will use this denial as a strategy to undermine the reality is on the ground. So the shadow report is one in terms of you need as a civil society, how vibrant you can be and how legitimate are your actions in terms of presenting your report is important, because it is not that you can be unconstitutional and illegitimate in terms of what you are saying, because if your data is correct and if your procedures are legitimate, then I think you need to present in a legitimate way for government to listen. If not, then probably you need to make an effort, because then the government will have no excuse. You need to present, but if they don't respond, then you need to go to the international level. But however, I would see in terms of the UN special rapporteurs is other instruments which in most cases are effectively used, because they are objective, they don't belong to any particular sect. So therefore they make an objective assessment, hold the state accountable and present this, and then ask for response. Anyone else? Tavanga?
Thank you, and thank you for the great presentation. I also wanted to comment on the shadow report quickly. I was quickly checking the guidelines for the African Commission on Human and People's Rights on shadow reports. From what I see, I think there's no obligation for CSOs to actually present the report to their respective countries, and each state is already aware that a shadow report is an obligation on their part. And according to the SCHPR, it actually goes 2 weeks prior to the state report. So it's called an alternative report for a reason, because by the end of the day, the respective committees would like to compare what the CSOs are saying with what the government is saying, because the state report goes there as well. So if it has to be sanitized by the government, then all what we're trying to do is we're actually sending the state report twice. So I think it's like an independent stand by the CSOs that the committees would like to appreciate. And having said that, we still have suspicious issues where probably the government is suspicious about what you're going to do, what you're going to say. And then because of that mistrust, probably then you develop a bad relationship with the government. But from my observation, I think I've sat in several shadow reports like the CEDAW, like the UNCRC, and then the regional one on the children. What I see is that for Malawi, the government is just quite okay with the shadow reports without them being sanitized by them, and then they send the state reports. So it also depends country to country in terms of the relationship that the CSO has with the government. But suspicion will always be there.
Yeah, that's right. I think I think it's a two-way, Tawanga. One is in terms of how did the civil society build their profile in the country, also and what credibility they have with the government. Certainly it depends, but on the other hand, it all depends in terms of the approach of the government towards civil society. So do they see it as a positive, where they can learn, they see that's the voice coming from the grassroots, and as a state, they're obliged to respond, or do they see it from a negative thing? So I think in both in terms of the state response to that and even civil society, but how do they really build? Because I think that's where I was looking in terms of what's the correct word is in terms of vibrant civil society. But unfortunately, in most countries, the civil society is docile, and they are dictated by the conditions of the government. Messaggio?
Yes, thank you. I think I'm just interested in the last part where you were talking about approach to actions. And what we as individuals can be able to do. And I'm also relating it to what Mary was saying, that this is a very challenging area, because you find that it's not just at state level where people don't want really to report what is on the ground. even in terms of family, like I was looking at where you were saying that we can, be in our neighborhoods, be the stand up for, gender equality and all that, to say that, I really am not sure to say, because you find that even at, whether you are talking for family level, when such happens, gender-based violence and things like that, you find that even the people who are being treated unfairly, sometimes they are not willing, to share that kind of information, and to go all out and think that we can be able to stand, for them.
Yeah.
It's also like putting your life, at risk, because they might turn around and say, this is the person who went to the police to report and things like that. And you end up like you are breaking, the family and things like that. So I'm just saying, really, I think it really takes, I don't know what kind of, training people would need to be able to stand up and really seriously fight for equality and things like that.
Yeah. Thanks, Mesojo. Where are you from, Mesojo?
From Botswana.
Yeah.
Maseko.
Yeah. Yes, Mesojo. I think you
Maseko.
raised. Yes, Mesojo. I think you raised a very important one. I think it's not an easy task. It's very complicated, very risk taking. Whether there are trainings of risk taking is something that we need to explore. But certainly in terms of, it is challenging, but somewhere somebody has to challenge and somebody has to face consequences, because there is no easy answers to this, because I think the violations are continue to exist if it is not opposed. So there must be some place they need to gain. That's where I think the civil society comes into effect, rather than individuals. If a group of individuals can raise it, but even then the individuals can be targeted. But I think one need to weigh in terms of you need to be prudent enough in terms of when and where and how you raise issues is important, but not compromising on raising it. Thanks, Mesojo, for that. Go ahead, Swan.
Thank you. I just wanted to read the comments in the chat box as I promised.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think one. Yes, Gertson, go ahead.
Yes. There are several chats with comments. I think some of them are just to acknowledge what other speakers had said.
Yeah.
There's one from Doreen, from Natalia Williams, who says, for sure, Mary, unfortunately, most reported problems of violence against women end up in the drawer with no action at all.
Yeah.
And that there is need for government to work and address violence leveled against women. Then Telvina Santos says that this is all because of the African Marxism. That's why they don't want women to govern. Caroline Wanza commented to say, there is also some kind of violence that is rarely talked about, because most of these women hold high places in society and prefer to go quiet. It is expected that they should be in perfect marriages. Marital rape is a silent injustice. And it would be interesting to know how such women can get help. Women are ashamed when they report the same at the gender offices provided at police stations in her country. Sentiments like it's your husband's rights are what is a common response. This is Caroline is from Kenya.
Okay.
And Peggy is agreeing with her to say that marital rape is a concern. And some countries still don't believe there's such a thing, based on traditional norms that a marriage one is consensual sex. Consent has to be expressed at all times. Otherwise, it is rape.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sanab. Thank you very much for sharing. I think very important ones you raised in terms of, I think what type of, although there is so much of clarity in terms of violence, still there are many forms of violence which are not being addressed. Certainly marital rape is one part of it. And then as Etilvina was saying, in terms, I think we need to recognize that the structures are not gender neutral. And they also represent the inequalities that exist in the society. After all, these are the people who have gone from this cultural background. So therefore, the subordination exists even in the institutions that believe. So therefore, the actions that they will be able to do it. Yes, Cynthia and then Mary.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. They say a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a step. I think this program is something that is very good, and I hope it's continuous. Like knowledge gained helps. When it comes to things about rape, because of the nature of the abuse or the crime, it is so difficult because the person who is a victim is already in a very dark space. It will need a very committed person to accompany and maybe seek justice. The family, the society, why were you there? You asked for it. These are things that make it difficult, that if for any reason, maybe it pushes, it goes to court. The way the women and the girls, when you are being cross-examined or whatever, when they witness it, they'll say, I'd rather not go that late. You are re-raped 1,000,000 times. Society judges you. And in some cultures, a woman can even be killed by her brother because she has been raped. We hear of it, like in certain cultures and all that. So my own take in it is we are gaining knowledge. Awareness campaign is very important. Yeah. Don't get tired of encouraging, talking. Why I'm saying this, I'm a missionary serving in Botswana. At the time I was involved in the anti-human trafficking thing, Botswana had no laws. But we thank God, when South Africa was hosting the World Cup in 2010, we went for meetings, we were trained, we said, okay, we knocked on, until eventually we have a law that criminalizes human trafficking. How many years? So my own suggestion, or would I say, I'm just sharing, let us not get tired of talking about it. Every opportunity, talk about it. 9 will not believe you, 1 will believe you. The one that believes you takes the message to another group, gradually. Yeah. And the last but not the least, family is important. How do we bring up our children? Yeah. We are the ones who form these children, especially women. We form, let's say, family of 4. I have a family like that. 3 first, then a boy, the smallest one. And he's a god already at the age of 6. Yeah. So I asked the mother, tomorrow, when he believes that his sisters are worthless, are you going to blame him? You're the one who set him up on that pedestal. Why don't you train him to say that he's a child in the family? He takes his place. There's no discrimination, but you favor him over his bigger sisters that at 6 can tell his elder sister of 15 to shut up. When men are talking, you're not supposed to talk. So these are the dynamics of how we can tackle this. But it will still be there, but as we create awareness in our communities, wherever we are, encouraging people to speak up in the best we can, I think, without consciousness, even if I want to abuse, when a man knows that, yes, it is possible that my wife can actually take me to court for marital rape, he'll be a bit slow the next time if he's been getting away with it. And that is where the change actually begins in society. When people become sensitive that they cannot get away with things they are used to, because there are consequences and obligations. So that's my own contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia, for that wonderful thing. I think, the two things that impressed me very much. I think one is in terms of we need to be constructive. We can't only bank on the limitations, but we need to look at what opportunity exists. How do we harness them to make a change? And the second one, which I think what you said is in terms of the importance of the awareness, and then the change with me and at my household. I think very well said. I think with Mary, I think we need to, Mary would be the last. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
I just want to say, like the incident I was talking about in Kenya, when we had post-election violence, I think the government didn't act because the victims, the women who were raped, were actually saying they were raped by the police. And they saw them, they know them, but it's like now it was a shame to the country. Like, how can you say that the law enforcing agents were involved in rape? And so to date, no action has been taken. And then also, just like my colleagues are saying, when we talk about rape, no, somebody had just said something about not speaking out. This morning, we have rescued a child, a 12-year-old child. She's living with a disability, both physical and she's deaf. This child was raped, we call it defiled. She was defiled some time ago. We put the case, it went up to court. The case went to court. And then suddenly, like the child has not been coming to court. And the court, like now they were going to drop the case because the victim does not come. But this is a child living with a disability. She can't walk, she can't hear. Now, this morning we discovered the child hidden in the house. She's actually dying. And the father was given a cow and a goat to compensate. And what the father is feeling is that this girl being the way she is, disabled, she can't move, she can't hear, she will never get married. So he's now counting on this goat and cow that he has received from the perpetrator, and he's glad. And because of that, he has hidden the child from going to court. By the way, we have just taken her to hospital this morning. She's admitted. Then I also want to say that we have kind of, especially in Africa, we have labeled people, we have labeled rapists. Rapists are jobless people. They are people on drugs. They are taking marijuana. They are people who are like illiterate and all that. I have told my community, anybody can rape somebody. Anybody can rape a woman. And sometimes we have had people like religious leaders who have raped children, defiled them. We have had like politicians who have done that. We have had teachers, we have had parents. And when you bring this out, you hear people asking you like, oh, do you really think a whole head teacher can do that? Do you think a whole professor can do that? Do you think I have a professor who impregnated a 13-year-old sick child? And it was like, do you think? So we make it look like gender-based violence is associated also with the professionalism. People who are professionals can't do it. People, you know, it is left for the law people. And I think some of these things have really contributed to continuous abuse of women, to continuous abuse of children without the perpetrators facing the law. Thank you.
Very well said, Mary. I think I think we need to keep that in mind in terms. Thanks, Mary, for sharing. I think, yeah, it's a very, very pathetic case. How does everyone respond? I think in terms of the most vulnerable within the communities, like disabled or other forms of diversity. I think one is in terms of, I think one, if we are working on the human rights, then we are on the side of the victims. I mean, how do we look at it? I think what challenges we may have to face and what initiative that we need to take up and how do we mobilize, I think is very important one. So thank you very much for everyone. I think before we close, I would like to say that on Wednesday and Thursday, on Wednesday, we are going to have a discussion on should spouses share between them domestic chores within the household. And then the Thursday, we are going to talk about should women have the freedom of choice. So what we are doing is in terms of, we are inviting people from the earlier cohorts to present to you, since they have gone through the thing, if they have applied or if they have gained insights. So there will be a 15 minutes input from one of those participant, and then we open the discussion open the floor for discussion. So let meet you on Wednesday, same time, and then it's more in terms of there is no input, but it's more a discussion where we can bring in our own experiences, our own perspectives of the issues that we have said. Because SIDA and Beijing Platform for Action talks about one is in terms of the sharing responsibility, where it talks about against cultural practices. The second one in terms of all those articles and provision and critical areas talks about the areas where women need to have right and freedom. So thank you very much, one and everyone, for your active participation, and we'll meet you on Wednesday, same time. Thank you very much. See you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.